Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nerdish of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. I'm Raffi, joined by Davian. Davian, the NFL season is slowly coming to the end, regular season wise, which means we are almost at the playoffs, the postseason. One of the times
Yup.
this year where I actually really enjoy football, regular season football, outside of having a fantasy team, kind of gets boring, kind of gets repetitive for me personally. But the NFL playoffs, similar to the MLB playoffs, I love them so much. It's going to be great. Are we going to see Patrick Mahomes somehow lead the Chiefs to a three-peat? Probably. But anyways, it is what it is. Davian, how do you feel right now? Obviously, as we've discussed previously, your Patriots are getting closer and closer to 5 wins. They need to win out to get over 5 wins. So how do you feel about that? Do you think the Patriots are going to get over the hump? And in general, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. In terms of the Patriots, I could be feeling better about them. But but I refuse. I refuse to that there will come a day that I will make a TikTok arguing why Mahomes is somehow better than that man that's hanging on my wall over there. I don't believe that will ever happen because I know the Patriots are going to win out and they're going to clutch up and they're going to show why they're the team that matters. And if they lose, then oh well, we get Travis Hunter. I feel like it's either a win for my ego or a win for the team. You know. I could be beyond that. I mean, look, just like you said, I'm so excited for the postseason football. There's nothing really like it, and I feel like we have a lot of really fun, interesting teams out here, especially with very, very good offenses, which of course makes for a very exciting game. But with that being said, Rafi, I mean, your Falcons are on teetering their way into the playoffs, barely, not really. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny you say teetering because I wouldn't even say they're teetering. The way that things have collapsed for the Falcons, okay, sorry, that is incredibly predictable. I was gonna say you couldn't have expected this, but no, this is extremely
You
predictable
could
for
have,
the Falcons.
you could
But
have.
what was
You're
I
right.
gonna say? But yeah, they're moving to Michael Penix Jr., who will be starting this upcoming weekend. I mean, if there's any team for you to get a warm up game in, probably against a team like the Giants is probably a good team to go up against for your first matchup. But
Yep.
that's just how it goes. The Falcons had a great chance, and of course, you would have to imagine the Falcons win their first four divisional games, two of them versus Tampa Bay, their biggest foe in who's going to win the NFC South this year, NFC South divisional contenders. And they proceed to squander that. And the Buccaneers have a really nice end of season. The Falcons have a really easy last 3 games, but the Buccaneers have arguably an easier last 3 games. So right now, the Falcons need to hope that the Buccaneers slip up at some point, and then you'd have to assume that the Falcons
Which
win
is
out.
tough considering the Bucks seem so good, but yeah.
Yes. So I believe the Falcons not this week because they're gonna take care of business, but I think next week when they play the Commanders, they're gonna lose that game Sunday Night Football, and then we'll be promptly eliminated. It's a shame because it really looked like Kirk Cousins was putting things together, especially midway through the season. But the last couple weeks he was terrible, and this past
Yeah.
weekend
I
he
mean,
did
coming
the
off his
worst
injury,
thing.
like he's fine.
Yeah, and this past week he did the worst thing imaginable, and that was not throwing one more pass to Bijan Robinson for 3 yards, which would have given me a win in my fantasy football first round matchup. Instead, I lost by 1.2 points. But instead of going down that whole rabbit hole and discussing where I could have gone wrong with my fantasy selections, let's focus on the real world right now. And Davian, there's going to be 7 teams in the AFC, 7 teams in the NFC, and some of these teams, just by the looks of them, you know, I don't know if they're cut out for a deep playoff run. So I think now's a great time for us to look at some of the teams that are currently in the playoffs or likely going to make the playoffs and determine, okay, what teams do we think are for sure going to go on a deep run? We think are great, maybe a little under the radar too potentially, and which teams are we just going to be like, no, there's no way they go on a deep run. If they go on a deep run, they have some crazy witchcraft going on for them to go on this type of run. So, Davian, we'll start off with the positive because we like to be positive on this podcast, even though both of our football teams are terrible and both of our hockey teams are also terrible. And I don't watch basketball
We're
anymore,
good
but your
comeback.
basketball team has also been terrible. So we'll
What?
stay away from the
What
negative
do
for
you
a little
mean?
bit. And anyways, we'll start off with the positives. Starting off with our contenders, Davian. What out of all the teams? We'll start over in the NFC. What NFC team do you think is a true contender? You have full faith that they can go on a run to the NFC Championship game
The
or further.
Eagles. I mean, I feel like it's the Eagles. I feel like there's no real argument to it. I mean, this Eagles team is just, they have one of the most electric offenses out there. It is top it's a top 10 offense, and their defense has been playing phenomenal as well. How do you not? And their defense has been, statistically, it's been ranked the number one defense in the NFL according to certain statistics. So at the end of the day, I don't know how you can't say it's the Eagles. They're a well put together juggernaut machine. They had their slip ups earlier in the year, but clearly they have the chemistry. They have an insane backfield. They have a great quarterback. They have an amazing wide receiver core. I don't know what else this team, like, the only thing that can hinder this team is a lack of chemistry, which we've seen time here and there throughout the season. But at the end of the day, this is a Jalen Hurts quarterback who's been to the playoffs. He knows how the playoffs work, right? This is a coach who's been in the playoffs. He knows how the playoffs work. I see this team being a contender. I see this team going potentially all the way to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, 100%. And I like many people were skeptical of the Eagles to start the year. They started out pretty rough. I believe they were 2-2 after week 4. A lot of people were calling for Sirianni to be fired, which I think that's just Philadelphia fans just being very diehard, very dedicated, and when things are working out, fire everyone. And Sirianni, for all of his policies, and even though he's made some dumb decisions that have been covered up by the Eagles playing really well the past couple weeks, they still won 10 straight. And it's really hard for teams to just fumble their way through winning 10 straight. We'll talk, I'm sure one of us will be talking about a team that has kind of done that this entire year of playing that tight, fine line of winning and just barely winning. Although, if one thing goes wrong, you could be facing like a 500 record. But I think the main thing that's really cemented me as well on the Eagles being contenders this year was this recent 5 week stretch they've been on. They beat the Commanders, they beat the Rams, they beat the Ravens, they beat the Panthers, and they beat the Steelers. So most of those teams, sorry, Panthers fans, are teams that I expect to make the playoffs this year. And for the Eagles to have played as well as they have in those games, I think really stands out to me as well. So I definitely see your point, and I personally really agree with you. I'm going to go with my NFC contender now. And for me personally, it's I understand why some people are skeptical about the Green Bay Packers. They've lost 2 games versus the Lions this year. They lost their 1 game so far to the Vikings. They don't have a lot of great wins versus teams that are likely going to make the playoffs. But regardless, I still think their offense with Jordan Love. Also, look into Jordan Love when Toyotathon is going on. His stats during Toyotathon are insane. Unfortunately, Toyotathon is not going on during the NFL playoffs. Otherwise, I'd have the Packers slam dunk contender, slam dunk winning the Super Bowl. But unfortunately, Toyotathon is likely going to end right before the playoffs, which is really sad for many people. Anyways, cars aside and Jordan Love aside, the Packers still have a great offense. The offense was good last year. The big hindrance for them last year from going on a really deep run was Joe Barry and the defense. They fired the coordinator, they brought in a new guy, and the Packers defense has been much better this year. And overall, I think it's really starting to shape up into being a really solid unit. Pick up McKinney from the Giants this past offseason. He's been a great addition at safety. And I think this Packers team's really rounded out quite well with Josh Jacobs as running back. So I really like where the Packers are at, and I think the Packers could potentially go on a pretty deep run this year.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually agree with you there. Just because I watched, I know, Rafi, that you sometimes get bored of games, and you see one of the games I actually did watch was the Packers Seahawks game because I was tired of studying for my final. I was like, let me take a break and I watched this game. I really like this Packers team. I mean, they have a very good offense, which we saw last year, and their defense was very good. And now I understand they were, it was Geno Smith, and the Seahawks aren't, the most. It's a good. I would say the Seahawks are a good offense too. They're a solid team. But at the end of the day, I was very impressed from what I saw with the Packers. And I understand that the Packers lost to the Lions. You can say, well, oh, the Lions are a better team. The Lions swept. But Rafi, I know you're going to touch on the Lions, but the Lions are just no longer that team that they were. So at the end of the day, if you look at the Packers' losses, they're really not that bad. So I really do see this Packers team going pretty far.
100%. Let's move over to the AFC. I'll start off with my AFC contender, and then after our contenders, we'll get into the pretenders. And
Yep.
my AFC contender is the Buffalo Bills. The Bills, the past couple of years, yes, they've found ways to lose. The Chiefs have been their boogeyman in the playoffs, but the Bills beat the Chiefs this year.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to really bode well for them. going to the playoffs when they eventually play them again in the AFC Championship game. I personally think it's just going to be Bills Chiefs again. I don't anticipate anything crazy happening. Yes, Lamar Jackson can change things, but the Ravens, maybe this will be discussed at some point, but the Ravens have had a tendency of not really showing up in the playoffs once we get deeper into the playoffs. Normally they fall in that divisional round or sometimes even in the wild card. But Josh Allen is just on a mission this year. I personally really ruled out the Bills this year. I had them at 10-7. I still have them in the postseason, but I did not expect Josh Allen to be as good as he's been, especially with the loss of Stephon Diggs this past offseason, getting traded to the Texans. And you have guys like Shakir who really stepped up in place for the aforementioned Diggs who left to the Texans, and James Cook's been great. That's been the other big thing too. Devin Singletary was not getting the job done as the running back of the Buffalo Bills. James Cook is that guy. He is a number one running back. He's a reliable running back, and although Josh Allen is putting together an MVP year and has been insane, I think the fact that you also have a solid running back who, if things start to be a little shaky, you can feed James Cook the ball and he's going to do a good job. So overall, I think the Bills' offense is now really very well rounded, quite balanced, and also the defense is still the Bills' defense. I know they haven't looked as great the past couple of weeks. They allowed a lot of points to the Rams. They allowed a decent amount of points to the Lions, but I think regardless, the Bills can outscore almost anyone in the NFL. And honestly, I'd say they can outscore anyone in the NFL. I think they're that good this year offensively.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, Josh Allen's putting up an MVP level type season statistically and just his performance on the field and gameplay. So I won't disagree with you there, but I will say that that is not my main contender. And you actually mentioned a pretender while talking about the Bills that I actually think is a contender, and that's the Baltimore Ravens. Look, this Ravens
Wow.
defense may not be as good as they were, right? They only rank 17th in the rankings according to some statistics. And, look, statistics is all arbitrary, right? When it comes to playoff times, that's not what matters. What matters is, will Lamar Jackson show up? And I think that this is the year that they do. And there's one reason why, and it's their backfield, and it's one man only, and it's Chipmunk King Henry. This man is absolutely unstoppable. He is the lifeline, I believe, for this Baltimore Ravens offense. And I truly think that this Ravens offense is going to carry and go far in this playoff cycle. And the reason why I keep honing in on offense is because I don't think that this is as much as a defensive league as we've thought it was in the past. Defense wins championships, but the thing is, right now in the playoffs, right now in the regular season, what matters is the offense. Can your offense show up? If your offense doesn't show up, then your defense has to go on the field more longer, and then they get gassed out because the offenses are so complex. It's so hard to defend an offense nowadays that if you're not a juggernaut offense, your defense is going to get very, very tired out, even against the worst offenses out there. And so that is why I think that this Ravens team is truly an exceptional team, just all around, and that's why I have them as a contender.
Yeah, I can see that point. Again, my main thing is just Lamar Jackson. He hasn't quite done well in the postseason. There's always the
That's
chance
fair. That's
that
fair. I think this is the year that it
he's
changes
bound to
for
go on a
him.
deep playoff run. But for me personally, I still just have him as a pretender until Lamar Jackson really steps up in the postseason. Regular season, he's great, but again, I don't feel too confident about that receiving core. Mark Andrews has been solid this year. Zay Flowers is very on and off. Some games he's amazing, and some games he's awful. Rashad Bateman's also similar to that in that sense as well. So the Ravens wide receiving core in general, can't get going. And Derrick Henry was held to 60 yards this past week to the Giants around. There's some questions that I personally have with the Ravens. Moving on to the pretender side, one of the pretenders that I have in the AFC is the Los Angeles Chargers. I know people are hyped about the Chargers. They just came back versus the Broncos as of this recording, down a couple scores, and then they wound up winning the game. Jim Harbaugh looks like a genius right
Yeah,
now for his free kick, field goal,
that is
whatever
insane.
nonsense. First time since 76.
It's no
I don't.
nonsense. It's a real rule.
Anyways, the Chargers is purely this podcast lore for those who don't know. I on numerous occasions, and especially when the Chargers played the Jaguars in the playoffs, I said the Jaguars are going to win because the Chargers are cursed. And what happened? The Chargers got out to a massive lead. I felt really dumb. And then Trevor Lawrence stormed back, and the Jaguars wound up being the Chargers. The Chargers are cursed. Nothing's changing my mind. Even if the Falcons were in the playoffs, I'd have the same thoughts about the Falcons. They're cursed too. But the Chargers consistently in the playoffs blow it. And I just think the Chargers are not in the same realm as the best teams in the AFC. I don't think they can hang with the Chiefs. I don't think they can hang with the Bills. Yes, they held close with the Chiefs early in the year, but in the playoffs, I don't think they're going to have a close game with the Chiefs. The Ravens are not in the same atmosphere as the Chargers. That's how bad I think the Chargers are. And the Bills are just not in that same. I take the Texans over the Chargers straight up too, even though with the Texans' offensive issues. So personally, I think the Chargers are just. I have concerns about them. If you shut down Lab McConkey, I think you really limit this offense's ability. J.K. Dobbins' timeline is still we don't know, and if Gus Edwards is your number one running back in the postseason, concerns about that. So being cursed aside, I still don't like how this Charger team looks entering the postseason.
I mean, this Chargers team's 9-6. I mean, I feel like that speaks for itself in some ways.
But
This
who have they
Chargers team.
beaten?
I
They
mean,
they
no,
lost. They got blown out to the Bucks. They got blown out to
no,
the
wait,
Bucks.
wait, wait, Robbie.
They
I'm not
barely
disagreeing
they
with you. I
barely
think you're
lost to
right.
the
I think
Chiefs.
you're right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
I
no,
was.
no. I'm saying it speaks for itself in the fact that they're not like an ultimate juggernaut team. They're 9-6, sure, but like maybe the like they lost to the Cardinals. They barely beat this Broncos team. Let's be honest, right? It was a close game for a while. Uh, they don't have that many. They don't really have any impressive wins, like at all. They beat really just bad teams or teams who have gone very bad
They
since
beat the teams that
beating
they
them.
should be. That's essentially like the Cardinals.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll give them that. But aside from that, we talked about this last week on our college football playoffs with Penn State.
yeah.
The Chargers are beating teams that they should be beating. They're not beating teams that they should
The Chargers are the
that they.
Penn State of the NFL.
See, but Penn State actually like can get like higher. Like Penn State is in that second tier, and that's how the Chargers are with AFC this year.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
who's
that's
your
true.
AFC pretender? Because I'm sure that'll be very
Yeah,
fun to talk
my
about.
my AFC pretender is somebody also in the AFC West, and they're a rank higher than the Chargers, and that's the Chiefs. Look,
Oh,
this
I thought it was
Chiefs
the
team does
Raiders.
not look good. I'm sorry. The record does speak for itself. They are a very good team. You don't become 13-1 by a bunch of flukes, right? I don't want to hear this BS really that's like, oh well, it's like if the field goal went the other way, if it was a one if what's his name? The Ravens tight
Isaiah
end was just
likely splits
is that
inbounds.
likely was
Yeah,
like, had a smaller shoe
or the
size.
DPI with
Like,
the Bengals.
geez,
Yeah,
like, come on. Like, I can make up excuses for every single team. Like, I can make up excuses enough to say that the Patriots should be number one in the AFC East under that type of thinking. But I just don't like this Chiefs team. Their offense is clearly not clicking. Their defense is just not that great. As like their defense is better than it was, but their offense does not look good. Patrick Mahomes needs a number one option, and he has none. Simple as that. Travis Kelce isn't the guy he is before. Xavier Worthy is not the number one worthy yet. Period. There's not much to add. The return of Hollywood Brown might help out the Ravens, but we'll see what that happens. And DeAndre Hopkins has not been playing that great either. So, yeah.
this has been a revelation that I've had over the years, and it started actually with that man in your back corner, Tom Brady, and that is teams that have a really good record but win very close games that could be decided by a coin flip are still very, very good teams and should be considered very, very good teams as a true threat. It's easy to blow out everyone, but it's another thing to consistently win really close games. That was the thing that really
That's true.
frustrated
That
me
is what he
watching
did.
Tom
That is
Brady
what
all
he
those
did.
years.
He was the king of it.
Tom Brady, the Patriots certainly had their blowout wins. Don't get me wrong. But for the
Yeah.
most part, you look at all these Patriots playoff games, you look at whenever the Patriots were trying to clinch the bye, they played close games to so many teams, and so many of those games could have been decided. Oh, if Chandler Jones lines up onside. Oh, if Julian Edelman, if this one ball that's surrounded by three Falcons defenders doesn't somehow fall into his hands, like they don't come back versus the Falcons. and we can get into the. I'm not living that PTSD right now. But anyways, you have to be a good team to consistently come out on the right side of those games. And I think the Chiefs are just like that this year. Yes, their offense hasn't looked as good as it normally has in past years, but I think Patrick Mahomes has bought into this. I think the Chiefs have bought into it. Yes, Davian, they don't have the high end talent that they've had in past years, but they know how to win close games, and I think that's going to bode very well for them. They essentially have the AFC locked up at this point. It's going to run through Arrowhead again, and prayers up to any team that's going to be going up against the Chiefs and Arrowhead this postseason. Let's move on to our final pretenders. My pretender in the NFC is a team that I had predicted to make the Super Bowl this year, actually. And I might still pick them. We'll see. Things can change. But I have the Detroit Lions. The big thing for me, and this isn't even because it's the Lions, it's injuries. Exactly. The defense has been devastated. Aiden Hutchinson might return at some point. McNeil, one of their other defensive tackles, recently got injured. He's out for the year. And now it's jumped to the offensive side, too. David Montgomery is going to be out at least several weeks, maybe potentially for the rest of the year and the rest of the season. So the Lions have been still playing really solid offensively. And it's kind of the same argument that you can say with the Bills. Like, hey, like they can pretty much outscore anyone. I get it. But I just have concerns about all these injuries racking up on the defensive side of the ball for the Lions. And also, I just think Dan Campbell is still being too over aggressive. And it starts with this past weekend versus the Bills. You're down 10 minutes to go. You just scored to make it a 10-point game. And Dan Campbell decides, let's do an onside kick. And yes, the defense wasn't playing well. Yes, Josh Allen was shredding the defense. But why are you doing an onside kick with 10 minutes to go when you're only down 10? I think his over-aggressiveness has really costed the Lions in years past. It costed them versus the Niners in the NFC Championship game last year by not taking the points when you should have. The Niners wound up coming back and winning that game in the NFC Championship game. My big thing is I love the aggressiveness by Dan Campbell. Don't get me wrong. I'd rather have an aggressive coach than a coach that plays way too conservative. I've lived that life as a Falcons fan. But there's a line. And I don't think he's found that line yet. And that's the main thing that's holding me back from the Lions right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Raffi, I'm gonna agree with you there. I think the injuries are really the main factor. I think Dan Campbell's coaching could be a factor as well. My biggest pretenders in the NFC North and NFC. I'm sorry, not they are also in the NFC North, and that's the Minnesota Vikings. I've been watching this Vikings team. I'm sorry, I just don't like them. I'm just put it simple. Like, yes, they have been playing very well, even with the loss of JJ McCarthy, and yes, we've seen Sam Darnold really prove to the world that the Jets are just a really sucky organization with building up quarterbacks. We see that in Geno Smith and Sam Darnold now, but I'm sorry. This Vikings team concerns me. You beat 2 weeks ago, you only beat the Bears by 3 in overtime. Yeah, you blew out the Falcons, but the Falcons were just playing very poorly that game.
Did you see that secondary? What are you doing leaving Justin Jefferson wide open? What were they
exactly.
thinking?
I mean, I feel like that speaks
for itself. Fantasy. So I was happy at I was very conflicted about that. What are you doing? It's like the Justin Jefferson post game was like, oh yeah, I didn't even that's hilarious that they just left me just like 101.
Yeah, literally,
I've never been that open in years. But anyways, sorry, continue.
Anyways, I'm sorry, I just don't think that this look, this team defensively ranks 13th. Offensively, they're not in the top 10. They're just not that great of a team, I feel. And I feel like that speaks for itself. Ignore their record. They're the biggest pretender of the NFC.
I mean, it wasn't too long ago, 2 years ago, and Theodore would remember this quite fondly. Also, Carlos as well, who works behind the scenes. The Giants, the Vikings were amazing 2 years ago, and then they walked into the Giants walked in, and Daniel Jones had a legacy game in which he got paid $1 billion for said season and said legacy game that he had.
Yeah.
But the Vikings just got clobbered, and that was a year where the Vikings were close, winning a lot of games close. A lot of games were decided by one score. This year, it's kind of a similar story. So, could the Vikings potentially win a deep run this year? Possibly. They have Jordan Addison now, which has been a revelation for the offense. They have TJ Hawkinson now, another revelation. Sam Darnold, not seeing ghosts. That's great to see. They called the Ghostbusters and clear them out of Minneapolis. But yeah, I agree. I think this Vikings team, again, it's just Sam Darnold. Maybe this team can prove me wrong, and if they prove me wrong, I'll eat my words. But yeah, this Vikings team is just, they just give me a weird vibe. It's like the Chargers, really, where it's just like I just don't think that you're gonna
Yeah,
go far. But
yeah,
who
yeah,
knows? That's why at the end of the day, none of our opinions do wind up mattering. We hope you enjoyed listening to our opinions, but the games are played for a reason. So we'll see what happens with our teams. We'll see if any of these takes turn out to be really good, which of these takes turn out to be really bad, because I'm sure some of them will be 100% dead on with, and some of them we will be like, why did we ever say that? But
yep.
regardless, we hope you did at least enjoy this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. Listen to our opinions, who we think are contenders, who we think are pretenders. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, follow us on TikTok as well, Benchwarmer Sports. And once again, for Davian, we hope you enjoyed this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. Have a good one. Have a nice holidays. And yeah, see you guys on the next one. Bye.
Peace.